Welcome to Fireside Chat, a devotional that takes place in the Fireside Room at Falls City First United Methodist Church in Falls City, Nebraska. This devotional follows the Revised Common Lectionary, a 3-year devotional tool which gives 4 scriptures each week. If you read all 4 scriptures each week, over the course of the 3 years, you will have read a vast majority of the Bible. Each week we will read the scriptures, and Pastor will give his first thoughts upon reading the scriptures, as well as any other interesting information there is for the week. We thank you for joining us, and we hope you find something meaningful and powerful in today's devotion. Each week I read from the Common English Bible, a recent translation by multiple Protestant denominations, including the United Methodist Church. Welcome to the Fireside Chat for August 14th. This is the 10th Sunday after Pentecost. We remain green and we remain in ordinary time. The readings for today, the Old Testament reading is Isaiah chapter 5, verses 1 through 7. The song reading is Psalm 80, verse 1 through 2 and 8 through 19, and this can be found in the United Methodist Hymnal in number 801. The epistle reading is Hebrews chapter 11, verse 29 through chapter 12, verse 2. And then the gospel reading is Luke chapter 12, verses 49 through 56. The Old Testament reading today is Isaiah chapter 5, verses 1 through 7. This is titled The Song of the Vineyard. Let me sing for my loved one, a love song for his vineyard. My loved one had a vineyard on fertile hillside. He dug it, cleared away its stones, planted it with the excellent vines. He built a tower inside of it and dug out a wine vat in it. He expected it to grow good grapes, but it grew rotten grapes. So now you who live in Jerusalem, you people of Judah, judge between me and my vineyard. What more was there to do for my vineyard that I haven't done for it? When I expected it to grow good grapes, why did it grow rotten grapes? Now let me tell you what I'm going to do with my vineyard. I'm removing its hedge, so it will be destroyed. I'm breaking down its walls so that it will be trampled. I'll turn it into a ruin. It won't be pruned or hoed, and thorns and thistles will grow up. I will command the clouds not to rain on it. The vineyard of the Lord of heavenly forces is the house of Israel, and the people of Judah are the plantings in which God delighted. God expected justice, but there was bloodshed. Righteousness, but there was a cry of distress. These verses are hard. And I know that we've had a lot of similar verses as the Old Testament through this period of ordinary time has traveled through prophets, and oftentimes the prophets are calling the nation of Israel back to what it was supposed to be, back to what they were called to be, which was a nation that in the words of Micah 6:8, right, loved justice, sought kindness, and walked humbly with God, and um, they didn't always achieve that. And so the injustices of the world would cry out to God, and God would come to them and say, "Hey, you need to to be doing what you're supposed to be doing," and that God would bring judgment, and God would call for judgment. Um, and we oftentimes see in the prophets that they're not predicting great things, all the time. And here we see that this is a word of judgment, using the imagery of a vineyard that had a nice protective hedge around it to keep all the wild animals out, to keep the things that would destroy the harvest out. And yet, what we see at the end is that God's going to remove that protection and allow the things in, because Israel's no different than the lands around it. And so God doesn't need to protect it because it's not doing what God had wanted it to do. It's not producing good grapes. It's producing the rotten grapes, just like all the nations around it. And so this is a good solid reminder for us, right? That we are called still in our world, right? It's not that we've superseded the Israelites by any stretch of the imagination, but we're in the same process of trying to build the kingdom in the world. That we're called to be doing justice. We're called to be making good grapes, right? Bearing good fruit in the Christian terminology. And when we produce rotten fruit, that this is something that God can and does sometimes do. Um, and there's more to it, obviously, than that. But this is a good reminder, that we are called to be doing something and called to be a certain kind of people, and we need to remember that and make sure that we continue to be on that. The song reading today is Psalm 80, verses 1 through 2 and 8 through 19.
This is listed as for the music leader according to Lotus Blossoms, a testimony of Asaph, a psalm. Shepherd of Israel, listen. You, the one who leads Joseph as if he were a sheep, you who are enthroned upon the winged heavenly creatures, show yourself before Ephraim, Benjamin, and Manasseh. Wake up your power, come to save us. You brought a vine out of Egypt. You drove out the nations and planted it. You cleared the ground for it and then planted its roots deep, filling the land. The mountains were covered by its shade. The mighty cedars were covered by its branches. It sent its branches all the way to the sea. Its shoots went all the way to the Euphrates River. So why have you now torn down its walls, so that all who come along can pluck its fruit? So that any boar from the forest can tear it up, so that bugs can feed on it. Please come back, God of heavenly forces. Look down from heaven and perceive it. Attend to this vine, this root that you've planted with your strong hand, this son whom you've secured as your very own. It is burned with fire, it is chopped down. They die at the rebuke coming from you. Let your hand be with the one on your right side, with the one whom you secured as your own. Then we will not turn away from you. Revive us so that we can call on your name. Restore us, Lord God of heavenly forces. Make your face shine so that we can be saved. So here we see it's very similar imagery. In fact, almost exactly the same imagery used as was used in the Old Testament reading, the Isaiah reading. As we talk about a vine or a vineyard in Isaiah, we talk about um, that the walls have been torn down, right? That God has torn down the protection around it or removed the protection around it, so that now it is destroyed. Now that it can be plucked up, and boars from the forest can come eat it, and bugs can come feed on it. So we have that same general imagery, but here we see it not from God's perspective of kind of declaring a disappointment, but instead from the people's perspective as they are witnessing this and they are feeling the destruction, they're feeling the crisis on the nation, and they're calling out to God to come back and to save. And so here we see not only that God is calling us to a certain way of living and calling us to caring about the poor and the widows and the orphans, but also we see that the people are calling upon a history that when in crisis they return to God and they repent and they change things, and that God doesn't ultimately deliver the full sound punishment that a lot of these prophets wind up calling for. That instead that God comes back to the people, that once they are building the kingdom again, that God will go with them and will indeed save them and return to the Son whom God has secured as his very own. And so um, here we see a reminder of that part of the life cycle of the Israelite people, the life cycle of the Old Testament, and oftentimes, frankly, the life cycle that we experience as well in our own lives. Our epistle reading today is Hebrews chapter 11, verses 29 through chapter 12, verse 2. This is the end of the chapter 11, the so-called Hall of Faith, um, as the author of Hebrews continues to lift up people um, who were faithful uh, in their life. By faith they crossed the Red Sea as if they were on dry land, but when the Egyptians tried it, they were drowned. By faith Jericho's walls fell after the people marched around them for 7 days. By faith Rahab the prostitute wasn't killed with the disobedient because she welcomed the spies in peace. What more can I say? I would run out of time if I told you about Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, and Samuel and the prophets. Through faith they conquered kingdoms, brought about justice, realized promises, shut the mouths of lions, put out raging fires, escaped from the edge of the sword, found strength in weakness, were mighty in war, and routed foreign enemies. Women received back their dead by resurrection. Others were tortured and refused to be released so they could gain to a better resurrection. But others experienced public shame by being taunted and whipped. They were even put in chains and in prison. They were stoned to death. They were cut in two. They died by being murdered with the sword. They went around wearing the skins of sheep and goats, needy, oppressed, and mistreated. The world didn't deserve them. They wandered around in deserts, mountains, caves, and holes in the ground. All these people didn't receive what was promised, though they were given approval for their faith. God provided something better for us, so that we wouldn't be made perfect, so they wouldn't be made perfect without us. So then let's also run the race that's laid out in front of us, since we have such a great cloud of witnesses surrounding us. Let's throw off any extra baggage, get rid of the sin that trips us up, and fix our eyes on Jesus, faith's pioneer and perfecter. He endured the cross, ignoring the shame, for the sake of the joy that was laid out in front of him, and sat down at the right side of God's throne. There's a ton in this passage, a ton in this chapter. And I encourage you to go and to read Hebrews chapter 11. It's one of my favorite chapters in the Bible. But we see here this long list of people, and the author of Hebrews has gone through Genesis and the first part of Exodus, and this kind of just throws up its hands and said, "There's a ton more that I could talk about, right?" And I encourage you to listen to those stories. The stories of Jericho, Rahab's part of the story of Jericho that's in the first part of Joshua. Gideon, Barak, Samson, and Jephthah are in Judges. David and Samuel are in 1st and 2nd Samuel. The prophets, of course, are in the prophets, which is also in the book of Kings. We have Elijah and Elisha in the book of Kings. The conquering of kingdoms, bringing about justice, realizing promises. Those are all in 2nd Samuel and 1st Kings. And a little bit in 2nd Kings, I guess. Um, Shutting mouth of lions, to me, is Daniel. Putting out raging fires is also in the book of Daniel with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. We see a lot of the uh, conquering and stuff happening in the book of Kings. But women receiving back their dead by resurrection probably refers to Elijah and Elisha, which are also in the book of Kings. Um, but then we see in the prophets, particularly I think of people like Jeremiah, who were thrown in prison, and who don't suffer, who don't suffer good fates, shall we say. And we see that there's both sides of that, right? That living in faith can lead to, you know, um, David conquering, uniting all of Israel and becoming this great king. But living in faith can also result in Jeremiah, thrown in a cistern in the middle of a famine, in the middle of a siege, and having all of this heartache and problems. It's whatever race is set out before us. Living in faith means that whatever we face, um, we recognize that the reward is worth whatever it is, and that's what matters anyway, is that heavenly reward and that heavenly kingdom. Uh, and so that's what we look for, and that's the promise that we hope for, and that's where we go forward. And so we see there in chapter 12 that first verse, in chapter 12, let us run the race that is set before us. Famous verse, and one that's called to many. And within that, right, we run the race, for we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses. That's one thing that I think is important for us to remember in today's day and age, is that we have the benefit of having this book in front of us that contains all these stories of people who lived by faith and lived into faith, and what they received as a result of that, and how their life wound up. Is that we have the stories that we can learn from. We have the stories of our own ancestors, right? We can sit on grandma's knee as children and learn about what God has done in their life as well, and we can do all of that, and we have the advantage of that. And that is the great cloud of witnesses that is surrounding us, is all these people who've lived before us, and who have experienced God's faithfulness, and have experienced the goodness of God before us, as we try and live into what's sometimes not easy, in living into the kingdom and living into the faith, and living the way that we're called to live. We do so surrounded by this great cloud of witnesses that says that it'll be okay, and and that we can continue to run, and will give us the strength to get back up when we fall. And that's so great. Finally, our gospel reading is Luke chapter 12, verses 49 through 56. The first paragraph here is listed conflicts brought by Jesus. I came to cast fire upon the earth. How I wish that it was already ablaze. I have a baptism I must experience. How I am distressed until it is completed. Do you think that I have come to bring peace on the earth? No, I tell you, I have come instead to bring division. From now on, a household of 5 will be divided, 3 against 2 and 2 against 3. Father will square off against son, and son against father, mother against daughter, and daughter against mother, and mother-in-law against daughter-in-law, and daughter-in-law against mother-in-law. Learning and practicing good judgment. Jesus also said to the crowds, when you see a cloud forming in the west, you immediately say it's going to rain, and indeed it does. And when a south wind blows, you say a heat wave is coming, and it does. Hypocrites! You know how to interpret conditions on earth and in the sky. How is it that you don't know how to interpret the present time? That ends the reading for this week. There are more verses at the end of the chapter if you wish to continue to read that. Verses like this, a lot like the Old Testament passages that we've been reading, these verses are difficult to hear and they're difficult to wrestle with. Um, and sometimes it's easier to just forget that verses like this exist, right? It's far easier to just go, to remember the passage where Jesus is praying to God that we might be one as Jesus and the Father are one, and it's far harder to look at these passages. But I think Jesus is recognizing a reality that life is not going to be easy for Christians, and that's certainly something that is a reality and something that is a truth. Um, Life has never been easy for Christians. We have stories all the way back to the beginning times, the beginning persecutions where people would be in prison getting ready to be thrown to the lions because they refused to say that Caesar was Lord. They demanded to say that Jesus was Lord, and um, all they had to do to get out of that prison was to just simply say Caesar is Lord and Jesus is not. And instead they were determined to head to the lions if necessary. Uh, they would not say that. They would not betray their faith. And we have stories of family coming in and begging people to just say it so that they could come back, and ultimately when they refused to do so, that family would be forced to disown the person sitting in prison for fear that they would then be thrown to the lions. And I think that Jesus is recognizing that when you live for the kingdom, you're living for the kingdom. You're no longer a heavenly. You're into a heavenly citizenship. You're no longer a citizen of the earth, and that if you really live into that, it's going to look different than the earth does. You're going to have different values. You're going to have different uh, things that you value. You're going to have different beliefs than make sense to the world. Christianity is foolishness to the Gentile. Foolishness to the unbeliever, as Paul says, and that you don't have um, the same the same values and the same life goals, and that's going to create division with those who remain in the world. That's going to create division with those um, who remain within the world's systems, and that is going to, like Jesus says, turn family on family, and that's not fun. It's not fun to think about, but it's been a reality for 2,000 years for those trying to live for the kingdom and for those trying to be Christian people and good Christian people. And so I think these verses kind of remind us of that stark reminder. Um, and really, I long for a day where the kingdom does come. I long for a day that we truly have a Christian community that is building the kingdom, that the values of the community, the values of the nation are the values of the kingdom. And I long for that kind of a day, but I don't think it's happening right now, and I don't think it's ever really happened. A true community of Christians following the kingdom and living for the kingdom would be unrecognizable to the rest of the world. It'd be unrecognizable to the United Nations. And I don't think that kingdom exists right now, and I long for that day, and I hope that day will come.
Thank you for watching this devotion all the way through to this point. My hope and my prayer is that you have gathered something from this, and that God has spoken to you at some point during this. If God has spoken to you, if you have gotten something from this devotion, please do comment down below. It really does help this devotion be seen by as many people as possible. Please do react on Facebook or YouTube. Comment down below and let me know what spoke to you and what you love about this series. As always, thank you for watching, and may God be with you until we meet again.